Hi, so my name is Greg Sanders. I'm Liquid Engineering Manager at Blockstream. I didn't put my key up earlier, so if you want now, take a picture. I really appreciated Sumpson's state chains thing, because it's a good contrast. We're good here. I'm just going to talk about hot wallet fun. So first, this is not a talk about Liquid. Liquid is a bunch of pieces put together, including a sidechain, which, for the purposes of this talk, isn't that important. It's a authenticated database that we assume is append only, et cetera, but for the purposes, we're just going to use that as a truth machine for the part of Liquid that manages the funds on the Bitcoin main chain. So I'll talk a little bit, just a little overview. Next, I'll go into the architecture and gotchas, the complications thereof. And then lastly, talk about some things we've thought about doing, some things we are doing, some things we might do. We'll see. So first, it's an automated hot wallet. So there's been some talks today about automated wallets, their downfalls. So that kind of knowledge carries into here as well. We can't really do, due to the federated nature, where it's kind of this Mexican standoff, things have to be mutually distrustful when possible, but at the same time cooperate to move history forward. It also means that updating this hot wallet takes a while. People have servers in places we don't know. We don't know where they are. They're communicating over Tor. We have to just tell them, hey, update, and then hopefully contractually obligate them to update. And last, we need to stay solvent. We need to credit people when they move money into the system, into this system. And when people request money to go out, it has to be withdrawn, processed exactly once. So that's just kind of the 10,000-foot overview. For the actual architecture, it's federated again. So specifically, it's a Bitcoin script. You can look at it. It's MFN 11 of 15 specifically for Liquid, but and then it has a time-locked emergency backup clause that activates weeks, months in advance, depending on how you want to set it up. This backup condition is meant to never hit with any liveliness of the system. It is indeed just a fancy bank, so the internal database can be kind of whatever. The Watchmen themselves, who manage these funds, this fungible pool of funds in the Bitcoin blockchain, they have two main activities. So first, it scans for state in both the sidechain or database, sidechain and main chain. And then it also participates in rounds, so processing pegouts. So first is scanning state. You can imagine, it helps me to imagine that you're the Watchman, you're one of and you're coming online after a long time of downtime. You had hard drive corruption, or maybe it's the first time you're on for the first time. And so you sync your Bitcoin up to tip from wherever it was, you sync your Liquid up to tip from wherever it was, and then you start to scan your Liquid chain from wherever you previously ended. So you start scanning through all the blocks, all the inputs and outputs, and so it looks something like this. So first you scan the inputs, and then there's these special inputs in the Liquid chain. You're scanning the Liquid chain, sorry. There's these special inputs that are specially marked and say, actually, I'm a Bitcoin input. I'm not really a sidechain input. And in it contains this Merkle proof and the transaction itself, enough for the Liquid daemon to validate this and ask the Bitcoin daemon if that block actually exists in the main chain and has proper confirmations. So this is where the claim comes in. People deposit funds, and then this deposit announces to the Watchman these funds are somewhere. So this is internally marked and tracked. Then you also scan the outputs. And then I put, I think, Liquid Batch 32 in some other form of address. And then there's a special burn output. This means a Pegout. So this is requesting a Pegout. So you actually burn the Liquid funds, the Liquid Bitcoin, on the sidechain. And this is a request to the Watchman to get your money out of the system. And so the Watchmen are also duty-bound to track this and try to process it in a timely manner. Next, you scan the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's orange, 'cause it's Bitcoin, of course. The donation case, there's two basically cases it expects to see. If it sees something that's like in the middle, then it kind of freaks out because it's not expected. So there's the donation case where none of the inputs come from itself. Someone decided to put money into the system. So I highlighted the red address on the output. It says, hey, that's my donation address. It's 1115. That's going to go towards the fee pool. And this is a separate fungible set, internal accounting that you use for paying for these transactions on chain. You don't get to assume miners are going to put it into a block for whatever reason, other than fees. The other case is the Pegout processing case. So where all the inputs are actually yours, every single one. And they must, if there's any, there must be all. And if you were paying attention yesterday to the Taproot talk, this is the similar. You take the pub key and you tweak it by the public key as well as the claim script, which was number 4 in that little box, claim script. So it's basically what address do you want to put in, what script do you want to encumber it to inside the Liquid blockchain. And from there, the Federation can recover the private key for that UTXO. And that's where these transactions have been signed. So this could be in the past somewhere in the Bitcoin blockchain, could be in the mempool, could be elsewhere, or in shallow blocks. And the change address, so basically every output must either be a change address, the highlighted 3, or some other destination that was requested as a burn on the sidechain. So once you're all caught up, you've internally marked all the money coming in, money coming out that you've seen so far. That's happened maybe without your participation, you don't know. You appear solvent. And then you now will process pegouts when requested. So it could be the case that when scanning the Bitcoin blockchain, you notice the Liquid blockchain, you notice there's a burn that hasn't been accounted for. So you participate in rounds every 15 minutes, round robin. So a Watchman master is selected, and it compiles a transaction proposal. So it has to, or attempts to add as many unprocessed pegouts as it can. I'll define what unprocessed means later. It may need to refresh some of the UTXOs that are getting old if there was like a UTXO that wasn't very useful for some reason, but a month has passed, you might want to refresh it so that the emergency key does not kick in. All the inputs must be mature, meaning 100 confirmations or more. And you have to take care to take all these standardness limits and also pick a fee rate that the other people in the Federation will find reasonable. It's proposed to peers, and then the peer does similar checks. Are all the outputs unprocessed? Are they Pegout requests you've seen but have not been processed? Yes, no. Is the fee rate sane? We add some sort of small constant multiplicative slop for that. And the most important thing is, does signing this allow a double payout? Because once you pay out, someone has the money and they've ran off the Caribbean or something. Some things are harder to check. So checking how they did coin selection, the master, it's not really a consensus system. And so things like how many change outputs it made, because there's some UTXO management going on that might differ based off your view of the mempool. But lastly, if things look fine, the HSM, you send it to the HSM, and the HSM does its own little checks. So it's this thing called Pegout Authorization Key, which is called PAC for short, just slang. But essentially, it's doing a ring signature over fixed identities to fresh addresses. It's kind of like you're a part of the Federation, so if you run off with all the money, at least we can call you and shake our fist at you. So that's kind of one of the checks we have there. And then the change address, so outputs either have to be that or the change address, like usual. Then it signs, and then you just broadcast. Once there's a threshold reached, it's sent to the mempool, and all the other members find out about it. So unprocessed versus processed means that to see a request, the user burns LBTC, Liquid Bitcoin, using a special template, and then there's 2 confirmations. Once it gets 2 confirmations, there's no reorgs possible to move it out of this sidechain history, and it has to be accomplished. If the Watchmen don't peg it out, it's money that you've stolen from these people, or whoever it is. And then to process it, it means not only have you signed it once, not only has it gotten one confirmation, it needs 100 confirmations or more. Otherwise, it's still on the books, still being watched for, because the security model of the system is within 100 block reorg, essentially. If it sees larger than a certain amount, we shut down. If it's larger than 100, it might be insolvent. The Watchman has to support double spending a transaction. There are an infinite number of cases where something you've signed, the HSM or the functionary knows they've signed, that it may not make it into a block 100 deep. There's just infinite possibilities, basically. Something you thought was reasonable was not reasonable to a Federation member. It's kind of hard to enumerate. There's just so many cases. But it's very important you also don't process the same Pegout twice. When you make a request and you sign for that request, you have to make sure that any other follow-up signature cannot confirm in the same chain. So we have the conflict tracker, which basically keeps track of everything you've signed for and anything you've seen completely signed. So in the batch setting, you might have like 2 Pegouts being processed. You need to make sure you block both of them, even if they're separate transactions. So if a Federation master says, hey, let's process this again, you might think it's a good idea, but you have to make sure that both of those other transactions have been invalidated. And this is critical. So basically, track the one, you won't sign for the destination unless you double spend the original. And the logic can get pretty hairy, but it's crucial to not end up insolvent. For fee accounting reasons and other reasons, you also need to deal with malleability. So pre-SegWit, I mean, originally this was built and it's pre-SegWit, and basically every signature changes the TXID. It's very, very difficult. But even in the post-SegWit era, you have to think about little things like how are you passing around these proposals? Do you track the thing you just filled in the script sig for or not? Little corner cases like that. That's right, and there's the 100 confirmation limit, but you still have to keep track of the things you see either in shallow blocks or in the mempool. So you don't want to double pay out shallow confirmed transactions. Like 50 blocks isn't enough. So, or you also don't want to unnecessarily bump out transactions from the mempool. So you end up doing things like re-implementing TX index, but for like 100 blocks. Another big gotcha is how you track the provenance of Pegout requests on the sidechain to whether or not they've been paid out on the main chain, because the script pub key and amount are not unique amounts. You can peg out to the same address over and over, same amount, and the Watchmen all have to come to a consensus of sorts that they're paying out the same ones, or at least the same amount of times. The other complication is testnet is pretty much useless. We get asked all the time, why don't we have a testnet? Why don't we have a testnet? Well, you know, I ran one of the Elements alpha nodes back in the day when I first started Blockstream, and fee estimates would wildly oscillate. So the 5x slop or whatever wasn't enough. It was just crazy different. You'd have weeks of SegWit censorship, I recall this. So you just wouldn't be able to process Pegouts for like 3 weeks unless you convince someone to turn on a few miners for free. You regularly get 1,000, multi-thousand, like 10,000 block reorgs. I remember 40,000. And then what use is that if you have to nuke the blockchain, start over, tell your integrators to like, you know, restart from the scratch? That's not very helpful. So we've thought about using a signed parent chain for sidechains. So Callium has been working on some stuff, getting a kind of minimal signed blockchain into core just for testnets. But that's like another set of infrastructure you have to run. And actually diverges from what you're trying to test in the first place, right? Every difference means that testing exactly what you want gets more difficult. But at least we have confirmation that a huge reorg makes the thing stop properly. Yeah, so future work. So things we will do or probably do. Dynamic federations is the first step. Right now it's static. So static Watchman set, static block signer set. We're looking to augment that, make it easy, a procedural way for having Functionaries come and go as required, and Watchman participants as well as part of that. So we're using the HSM as kind of a timekeeper, doing rate-limited block signing, and the blockchain itself as a proof of publication to propose these changes. So when somebody wants to join, we compile a new script using miniscript and all the fancy doodads, do analysis on it, make sure everything looks good. This is being done, all this cross-checking is being done on every functionary, and then we get basically, n minutes of heads up where you can set n to be whatever security parameter you want. So this Pegout authorization list could be changed, but only when you see or don't see a month of blocks, right? And then there's special consideration for moving the funds within the system to a safe location, right? If you try to transition to a Watchman set that can't sign for the previous set, you might get people pegging in money that can't move anymore, and that's something you have to analyze and prepare for and work around to keep people's money safe. And there's an open pull request there, under review iteration for that. So that's soon, and just today I was thinking about all the complications that are going to go in that. This has already been talked about a bunch, but useful HSM in this case. Samson's basically said, well, it's a little bit extra security, and that's right. Yeah, I mean, we have a little bit extra security in V1, but we've been thinking a lot about what we want to get out of it. So, the best case is that it does what it's supposed to be doing, keeping keys secure and running code it's supposed to be running. But what do we want it to run? That's really the question here. I mean, blind signing HSM gives us basically nothing. The attacker that somehow gets onto a supermajority of hosts decides to send arbitrary message to the HSM, they can just trick it into signing whatever they want, right? So that's not very useful. And so we have to do more than just try a little bit. So the Pegout authorization is an incomplete solution. It makes sure that money goes towards people we know about and can call, but that's pretty incomplete. Replay is still possible. You can take the same transaction in the chain, replay it to the HSM over and over. You can just fake a chain, right? The block signer is not that smart. It doesn't validate the whole history, and it really can't. I'll get more to that later. So 2 possible paths we've been thinking about is stick the entire Watchman in the HSM. So, first, let's just validate both the chains, but it's not enough. You have to put all the information there. Conflict tracking, all the other state I talked about, all those gotchas have to somehow fit in the HSM. So that means like authenticated peer-to-peer protocols to talk to Bitcoin. You need to talk to the Bitcoin network. That amount of horsepower means you make very limited choices on what kind of device you want to use, right? The security of the chip versus the horsepower. It's an incredible attack service, and it's not supposed to be easy to update by design, right? You can't do over-the-air updates, or you shouldn't. So the kind of other idea, which I call commit and monitor, but it's just a name I picked. You basically want to, instead of replicating all this logic, let it do something and do it well. And again, use the HSMs as timekeepers. Delay the Pegout processing and basically commit to, this is what I'm going to do. And then set up monitoring to basically stop any illicit Pegouts. Same situation as transferring the Watchman script to something new. It's under the same kind of a security model. Pegouts obviously become slower, which is an issue, but hopefully there's like a swap market, or there's other things to get around this authorization. So perhaps in the medium future we can work around that using economic means. Maybe Pegout authorization is not needed at all, but maybe it is. I don't know. So that's just kind of one of the questions of complexity versus simplicity. So takeaways is writing Bitcoin wallets is hard enough by itself. Any true Bitcoiner writes their own wallet and then rage quits. Federated wallets are just worse. There's a lot of things to consider. There'll always be, we'll always find another bug and we have to fix it. A little corner case that we haven't thought of. It's not a consensus system, so you can't do kind of a, I'd say in some ways it's even more difficult than writing like the consensus on the sidechain. In many ways it is. And protecting the keys is not enough. So not your keys, not your Bitcoin. It's pretty pithy, but it's the lowest bar you have to jump, and then you have to jump much higher as the value goes up. So, thank you. Rude. It's not a real question. You ask me that every day. You ask me that every day.
You crossed out the Thermite. Could you elaborate on that?
I think Samson or no JD, somebody years past said it was talking about like Thermite and HSM, and nobody would put that in their data center if that was the case.
Too dangerous then?
Yeah, no one would put it in the data center in that case.
Okay, too bad.
Too bad. It would be cool, but. Dimitri, back there. Dimitri.
So you talked about not only protecting the keys, but also the logic. So have you thought about using two HSM from different vendors and cross-checking the results and the computations?
I mean, we have thought about it a lot. There's benefits to be had. Maybe the lower hanging fruit is heterogeneous host boxes too. We're like literally giving them servers to host. So yes, we have thought about this. It's just a matter of cost and engineering time. Yeah, it'd be great. Because under the model, you wouldn't, with the 2/3 model, you could just have a split 50-50, and as long as one of them is not evil, they couldn't at least abscond. So it'd be great.